بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Last week in Sahih Bukhari we started reading, you were not here last week, we started reading a new section in Sahih Bukhari which was, were you here? Brother Muhammad Jibril was here. We started reading the section about Iman or faith last week. And the first hadith we read was the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ listed the 5 pillars or fundamentals of Islam. This hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu said, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال الإيمان بضع وستون شعبة والحياء شعبة من الإيمان. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu said that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, faith has more than 60 branches, and al-haya, or a sense of shame, having a sense of shame, is a branch of faith. This hadith, this is one wording of the hadith, and I think we mentioned before that in the summarized Sahih Bukhari, the author who summarized the book, the hadith in Sahih Bukhari may have a number of different wordings, but this author who summarized the book, usually he picked the first wording in the chronological order. He picked the first wording and then he stuck with that, and the other wordings are not included in this book. Other wordings of this hadith, the wording of the hadith is that faith has 60 something or 70 something branches. So the narrator didn't specify for sure, was it 60 something or 70 something? And regardless, the expression in Arabic 70 something, that's a common Arabic expression. It doesn't necessarily mean a particular exact number. It's like in English when we say dozens. When you say dozens in English, it doesn't mean that the thing you're talking about is actually a multiple of 12. It's an expression. It means it's a certain number. And another wording, the other wordings of this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that faith has so and so many branches, upwards of 70 branches. The Prophet ﷺ said the highest branch is, who knows? That's not the wording of the hadith, but it's close. Is saying something. Saying La ilaha illallah, saying there is no God but Allah. And the lowest branch is removing some harm from the pathway, and as having a sense of shame or modesty is a branch of faith. First of all, the Prophet ﷺ said that faith has upwards of 70. It has dozens and dozens of branches. There are many aspects of faith. Faith is like a tree that has many branches. The Prophet ﷺ in the hadith said that there are upwards of 70 branches, but he only mentioned 3, and in this wording, only 1. How is that possible? Why would the Prophet ﷺ tell us that there are upwards of 70 branches and then just leave it a mystery?
Because I think someone who already said La ilaha illallah with good intention and understand with the meaning, whatever his action, it will be on that branches 70.
Yes?
And because faith is in your heart, and you only know one type of thing, and I'm going to tell you because you have to figure it out, solve it.
Is there any other source that in the Quran? it's very possible that the Prophet ﷺ didn't list the other branches of faith, because when we read the Quran, we see them in the Quran. Is that possible? Can anyone think of an example of something, an action or a belief or something in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala connected with Iman or faith? Where is it connected with faith? It's definitely an aspect of, faith, but the wording there, again, it's not wrong, but the wording is not explicitly. There's a surah, the title of the surah. No, Habibi. Would give you a clue as to. Yes, Surah Al-Mu'minun. And again, we were talking about the meaning of faith. The meaning of faith is in Arabic is similar to it is in English. It revolves around having faith, or in other words, in trusting and believing in something that's not right in front of your eyes, but having faith in something and being faithful, being loyal or true. Or in other words, again, trusting and being trustworthy. Make it, the meaning is bigger than that, but that's a simplification of the meaning. And also a third part of having faith is professing faith, saying it out loud, declaring your faith. Those are three parts of faith. Making a declaration, having faith, believing in something that's not right in front of you, and also being true, being trustworthy, being faithful. The attributes that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in this hadith, they all, some way or another, they go back to those meanings. Obviously, the biggest one. The greatest one, the highest branch, is the Prophet ﷺ said, with saying La ilaha illallah, that's the greatest act of faith. You are declaring that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your God, your object of worship, and that you're loyal to Him. You're faithful to Him. You reject every other object of worship as being false. That's the pinnacle of faith, having faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being faithful to Him. Even the smallest branch of faith, the Prophet ﷺ said, removing some harm or litter or something from the pathway. Again, that's an act of. You could just walk around it. You could just walk around it. But part of being faithful and true and loyal, even when no one's looking at you, you have the interests of your fellow man at heart. So you're loyal even when no one's watching you, and you move that piece of harm from the pathway. And al-haya, or having a sense of shame, the Prophet ﷺ said that's a branch of faith as well. And again, the connection there is obvious. And someone who is faithful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they always, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always uppermost in their hearts. And if they do something shameful, even if maybe you can get away with it in front of other people, they feel a sense of shame. That's part of they're being faithful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even if they could, they're always, a believer is always aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala watching him, and he's always aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge of him, and he always feels a sense of coming up short or being ashamed before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even if everybody else puts him on a pedestal and holds him up high, part of his being faithful is that he always, no matter what other people may think, he always knows, how short he's come up before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's always aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge of him. So he has this sense of shame. Now, some of the, again going back to the Quran, and some of the Sahaba, some of the earliest scholars had a practice, and there are some ahadith that Ibn Abbas would do this, and one of the students of Ibn Abbas, Sa'id ibn Jubair, whenever they learned a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, they would look to see where that is in the Quran. Not that they're rejecting the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, or they won't accept it until they see a confirmation in the Quran. That's not the way that the Sahaba understood their religion. But from their understanding of the Quran and their understanding of the Sunnah, they understood that the Prophet ﷺ spoke from the Quran. And almost everything that the Prophet ﷺ taught us, the Prophet ﷺ was paraphrasing a meaning that the Prophet ﷺ himself learned from the Quran. So learning the words of the Prophet ﷺ and the actions of the Prophet ﷺ is unquestionably the best way to understand the Quran. Because what the Prophet ﷺ says, it's almost always a paraphrase, an interpretation of something in the Quran. And when it comes to the words of the Prophet ﷺ, they're not subject to error. As long as we're sure that the hadith is authentic, even some of the Sahaba, they may have had to interpret some things in the Quran, and they're human just like anyone else is. But the Prophet ﷺ himself, no one knew the Quran better than the one to whom it was revealed. So one of the best ways to understand the Quran is to look at the words of the Prophet ﷺ and then look where he's getting that from the Quran. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ said that faith is upwards of 70 branches. The Prophet ﷺ, in some wordings of this hadith, mentioned 3. Going back to the Quran, what are some other branches that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described in the Quran? Going back to the surah we agreed on.
When they speak, they don't lie.
Before that, Surah Al-Mu'minun. Yes. And that surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Successful indeed are the faithful. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala listed a number of traits. And it's as if those traits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned are an interpretation of what it means to be faithful. What was the first trait Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in that surah? الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. Those who are humble in their prayer. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. And who ignore profanity. And those two ayahs, they're like a pair. How are they a pair? The believers, they are focused and sincere and attentive when it comes to salah. Their heart is in it. Their heart is in their salah, in their worship, in their prayer. When they hear profanity, they turn away and they go the other direction. So this is again an example of being faithful and loyal to something. They are faithful and devoted to their worship, and they turn away from anything that distracts them from that. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. Those who give in charity. And the wording of the ayah, the way it's worded in the ayah, it doesn't just mean those who give in charity, it means those who consistently give in charity. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ وَمَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ فَمَنِ ابْتَغَى وَرَاءَ ذَلِكَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ. And those ayahs have to do with chastity, which again is the connection between chastity and faithfulness is obvious. And that's one of the most common ways people use the word faithful, someone being faithful to their spouse, their husband or their wife. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that these believers, they guard their chastity. They don't commit illegal relations. They guard their chastity except from their wives and their lawful servants. Now, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِأَمَانَاتِهِمْ وَعَهْدِهِمْ رَاعُونَ. And again, this is obvious how it has to do with faith. Those who take care of the things that they have been entrusted with and their agreements. If they make an agreement or a covenant or a truce, they are careful to abide by it. And if they have an amana, and even the word amana, it comes from the same root as iman. If they are entrusted with something, they have some responsibility that someone is entrusted with, that these faithful people take care of it. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَوَاتِهِمْ يُحَافِظُونَ. And those people who are consistent, who carefully guard their prayers. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't just mention people who pray sometimes, but those who are faithful in their prayers. They guard them carefully. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْوَارِثُونَ الَّذِينَ يَرِثُونَ الْفِرْدَوْسَ هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. Those people are the ones who will inherit. They are the heirs. And they were faithful and consistent and true to living up to these traits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described in the ayah. They were consistent, and eventually it paid off. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said they are the heirs. Eventually they will inherit. Someone who inherits, someone, for example, who has a rich uncle or someone like that, or a rich grandfather, they may be poor for a while, or even say their father is a king or something like that. They may be poor or weak for a while, but once they come into their inheritance, then everything is changed. Now they're rich and now they're powerful. This is an even greater inheritance, an inheritance that never ends. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, those people, those are the heirs who will inherit paradise and will remain there forever. Those are how many traits in the ayah? About six. About six, depends on how you count it. In Surah Al-Anfal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم وَإِذَا تُلِيَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُهُ زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا وَعَلَى رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ. If I stop, you'll stop. If I stop, you'll stop. See? In these ayahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, the faithful are only those people who, and most of the actions mentioned here are not physical actions, or not outward actions, like the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described in Surah Al-Mu'minun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, the faithful are only those who, when Allah's name is mentioned, their hearts tremble. And when His words are read to them, it increases their faith, and they put their trust in their Lord. And in the Quran, not just here, but in many ayahs in the Quran, tawakkul and iman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala connects them. Because there's an aspect of having faith. To put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is part of having faith in Him. And in other ayahs in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَتَوَكَّلُوا إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. And put your trust in Allah if you are faithful. If you have faith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and they وَعَلَى رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ, and they, in their Lord they trust. الَّذِينَ يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. Those who observe prayer and spend some of what we have provided for them. So those are two actions. Observing prayer and giving in charity. In Surah An-Nur. In the end of Surah An-Nur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ ثُمَّ لَمْ That's Surah Al-Hujurat. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَإِذَا كَانُوا مَعَهُ عَلَى أَمْرٍ جَامِعٍ لَمْ يَذْهَبُوا حَتَّى يَسْتَأْذِنُوهُ إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَأْذِنُونَكَ أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, the faithful are only those who have faith in Allah and His Messenger, and when they are with Him and with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on a matter of general importance, they don't leave without asking permission. And the meaning of this ayah, if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Prophet ﷺ would sometimes gather his companions with him because they were facing a particular danger, or there was an issue that needed to be addressed that had to do with the interests of the entire community. There were some people who, in one of those meetings, they would sneak away. They would wait till maybe they thought the Prophet ﷺ didn't notice them, and they would just leave. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and then there were others who would not do that. Even if the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't see them when they left, they would make a point of going to the Prophet ﷺ and asking him for permission to leave. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that the faithful are only those who, when they have faith in Allah and His Messenger, and then when they're with Him on a matter of general importance, they don't leave without asking permission. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَأْذِنُونَكَ أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, those who ask your permission, those are the ones who are faithful to Allah and His Messenger. Again, here the meaning is of their being loyal and true and not cheating. Even if the Prophet ﷺ wasn't going to see them, they made a point. They were faithful to him. They wouldn't allow themselves to do something dishonest like sneak away without him looking. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, those are the ones who have faith, who are faithful to Allah and His Messenger. Again, that's a small thing, but then the aspect of being true and faithful is there as well. In Surah Al-Hujurat, the ayah that I read by mistake, in the end of that surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that some of the Bedouin tribes who had just come to accept Islam boasted by saying, we have accepted faith, or we have faith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that surah said, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَرْتَابُوا وَجَاهَدُوا بِأَمْوَالِهِمْ وَأَنفُسِهِمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الصَّادِقُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught those Bedouins not to say that we are faithful, or we have had faith, but to say aslamna, we have surrendered, we have submitted. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, faith has not entered into your hearts yet. And then in the ayah after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, the faithful are only those who believed or had faith in Allah and His Messenger, and then didn't waver, didn't back off, or didn't have doubts, and they strived, they fought with their bodies, themselves, and their property in the way of Allah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الصَّادِقُونَ. Those people, they are the truthful ones. Those are the people who actually have a claim to faith, to being faithful. Because it's not just something that they said, they were true. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explicitly said. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الصَّادِقُونَ. They were true with their actions. Their actions proved that they were loyal, they were faithful, and they were true to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. And they sacrificed. They put their lives on the line, and they sacrificed their property for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his religion. There are also a number of ayahs where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that people who do a particular act are not faithful. And usually, number one, you understand from those ayahs that the opposite of those things is part of faith. And usually those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes as being unfaithful, they have to do with being deceptive or dishonest. Like in the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَقُولُ آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَبِالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَمَا هُمْ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, there are some people who profess faith in God and the last day, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمَا هُمْ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ, but they are not faithful. How are they not faithful? What's the ayah after that? Now, يُخَادِعُونَ. Again, deception, being dishonest and true. يُخَادِعُونَ اللَّهَ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَمَا يَخْدَعُونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ وَمَا يَشْعُرُونَ. They are trying to deceive God and the believers, but they only deceive themselves, even though they don't realize it. Then Allah also in Surah An-Nur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَيَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَبِالرَّسُولِ وَأَطَعْنَا ثُمَّ يَتَوَلَّى فَرِيقٌ مِّنْهُم مِّن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ وَمَا أُولَٰئِكَ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَإِذَا دُعُوا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ لِيَحْكُمَ بَيْنَهُمْ إِذَا فَرِيقٌ مِّنْهُم مُّعْرِضُونَ وَإِن يَكُن لَّهُمُ الْحَقُّ يَأْتُوا إِلَيْهِ مُذْعِنِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that there are some people, this is in Surah An-Nur, I don't recall specific incident that had to do with the revelation of this ayah. But the words of the ayah speak for themselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, now, some people say, they claim that they have faith in Allah and His Messenger, and we obey, but then some of them turn away after making that claim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمَا أُولَٰئِكَ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Those people are not faithful. They make that claim that they have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger and that they're going to be obedient, but then they turn away after that. They're not faithful. Their actions didn't match their words. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in those ayahs that if there's a dispute and if there's a dispute between them and someone else, they don't want to come to the Prophet ﷺ to judge between them because they know that he will judge against them. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَإِن يَكُنْ لَهُمُ الْحَقُّ يَأْتُوا إِلَيْهِ مُذْعِنِينَ. But if they know that they're on the right side, that they're on in the right, and their part, they will come rushing in submission to the Prophet ﷺ. So it's, again, these people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described as not being faithful, there's the aspect of them being, not being true, having two ways about them. There is another ayah. There are many ayahs in the Quran. This is just an example. There's another ayah that was in my head, and I think it's disappeared. Anyway, there are many ayahs in the Quran, and you look at it for yourself. When you read the Quran, see what the type of people Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes as being faithful or being believers, and the type of people and the type of actions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the people that are involved in those actions as not being faithful or not being believers. And you'll see that there are many branches, many aspects of being faithful, just as the Prophet ﷺ told us in this hadith. Now, we'll stop here and continue with the next hadith next week, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka.